The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Camp Pendleton's elite marksmanship facility as Victoria Hayes adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and approached the imposing steel gates. At 34, she possessed the kind of unremarkable beauty that allowed her to blend seamlessly into any crowd shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, modest jeans, and a faded university sweatshirt that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance suggested the extraordinary precision that lay dormant beneath her quiet exterior. The facility before her represented the pinnacle of military shooting excellence, where only the most distinguished marksmen from across the Marine Corps gathered for advanced training and competition. The gleaming buildings housed state-of-the-art technology, custom weaponry worth millions of dollars, and some of the finest shooters the military had ever produced. It was a world of rigid hierarchy, uncompromising standards, and deeply ingrained traditions that had never welcomed outsiders. Victoria's fingers unconsciously traced the dog tags hidden beneath her sweatshirt as she presented her civilian visitor's pass to the stern-faced guard at the checkpoint. Sergeant Williams, according to his nameplate, scrutinized the paperwork with the thoroughness of someone trained to spot irregularities. His weathered face bore the map of a career spent in harsh environments, and his eyes held the particular skepticism reserved for civilians who presumed to enter sacred military spaces. Mrs. Hayes, he read slowly, his tone suggesting the title was somehow insufficient. Purpose of visit? The question carried an undertone that made it clear he found her presence both unexpected and unwelcome. I'm here for the public demonstration day, Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. The community outreach program? She gestured toward a small flyer visible through the guard shack window, advertising the monthly event designed to foster civilian-military relations. Sergeant Williams glanced at the flyer, then back at Victoria, his expression shifting from skepticism to barely concealed amusement. Ma'am, you do realize this is a demonstration of advanced marksmanship techniques? Most of our civilian visitors come to observe, not participate. He emphasized the word observe, as if Victoria had fundamentally misunderstood her role. I understand, Victoria said quietly, maintaining eye contact. I'd like to observe the demonstrations, and if there's an opportunity for civilian participation, I'd be interested in that as well. She kept her tone respectful but firm, a combination that came naturally after years of navigating bureaucratic obstacles. The guard's radio crackled to life, and a deep voice emerged from the statics. Williams, what's the holdup? We've got VIPs arriving in 10 minutes. The voice belonged to someone clearly accustomed to immediate compliance, and Victoria could hear the impatience bleeding through the electronic distortion. Copy that. Seer. Just processing a civilian visitor. Williams shot another glance at Victoria, then stamped her pass with perhaps more force than necessary. Stay with the tour group. Ma'am, don't wander off. And don't touch anything. He handed back her credentials with the air of someone washing his hands of responsibility. As Victoria walked through the gates, she could feel the weight of curious stares from Marines going about their daily routines. Her civilian attire marked her as an outsider as clearly as if she wore a neon sign, and the casual confidence with which she carried herself seemed to puzzle those who expected visitors to display appropriate deference to their surroundings. The main facility emerged before her like a monument to military precision, gleaming structures of steel and glass that reflected the desert landscape in perfectly calculated angles. The central building housed the administrative offices and briefing rooms, while a series of specialized ranges stretched toward the horizon, each designed for specific types of training. The air carried the distinctive scent of gun oil and cordite. Mixed with the metallic tang of desert heat on concrete, Victoria paused near a fountain at the facility's center, ostensibly to check her phone, but actually to observe the intricate social dynamics playing out around her. Young Marines clustered in small groups in their conversations, a mixture of shop talk and good-natured competition. Senior non-commissioned officers moved with the purposeful stride of men, accustomed to making split-second decisions under pressure. And threading through it all was an undercurrent of anticipation that suggested today's demonstration would be something special. A woman in dress blues approached with the measured gait of someone comfortable with authority, Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez. According to her nameplate, possessed the kind of competent demeanor that immediately inspired confidence. Her dark eyes assessed Victoria with professional interest rather than the dismissive amusement she'd encountered at the gate. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, your tour coordinator." She extended a firm handshake. "I understand you're interested in our marksmanship capabilities." There was genuine curiosity in her voice, as if civilian interest in military precision was unusual enough to warrant personal attention. "Very much so," Victoria replied, grateful for the first genuinely welcoming interaction since her arrival. "I've always been fascinated by the level of skill required for military marksmanship." She kept her response general, revealing nothing of her own background while establishing her serious intent. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You've arrived at an interesting time. Colonel Steele is conducting a special demonstration today for some visiting dignitaries, and he's agreed to include our civilian guests in the briefing." She gestured toward the main building. "However, I should warn you that the colonel has very high standards and little patience for questions that waste his time." As they walked toward the briefing room, Victoria caught her first glimpse of Colonel Marcus Steele through a large window. Even at a distance, his presence commanded attention. Tall and powerfully built, with silver-streaked hair that caught the afternoon light, he moved with the calculated precision of a predator. His uniform bore the ribbons and insignia of a distinguished career, but it was the way subordinates unconsciously straightened when he passed that truly revealed his authority. Victoria felt a familiar chill run down her spine as fragmented memories threatened to surface. There was something about the colonel's bearing, the particular way he held his shoulders, that triggered echoes of a past she'd worked hard to bury. She forced herself to maintain her composure, but her hands unconsciously clenched as she followed Staff Sergeant Gonzalez into the building. The briefing room buzzed with controlled energy as Marines and civilian dignitaries found their seats. Victoria chose a position near the back, instinctively seeking the tactical advantage of being able to observe everyone while remaining relatively inconspicuous herself. The room fell silent as Colonel Steele entered, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from casual anticipation to rigid attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily through the room without amplification, a testament to years of command presence. "Today, you will witness capabilities that represent the pinnacle of human marksmanship." His gaze swept the assembled crowd, pausing briefly on the civilians section, with what might have been mild disdain. "The demonstrations you're about to see are the result of thousands of hours of training, cutting-edge technology, and the finest military tradition." Victoria found herself studying the colonel's face as he spoke, searching for something she couldn't quite name. There was an arrogance in his bearing that went beyond professional confidence, a sense of superiority that seemed to encompass not just his military achievements but his fundamental view of his place in the world. When his eyes briefly met hers across the room, she saw a flicker of dismissive assessment before his attention moved on. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez leaned over to whisper, "The colonel holds the facility record for long-range precision. 1,500 meters. Perfect conditions. But still an incredible shot." There was genuine respect in her voice, mixed with something that might have been apprehension. As the briefing continued, Victoria learned that today's demonstration would include multiple ranges and culminate in what Colonel Steele termed an exhibition of impossible precision. The description sent another chill through her, and she found herself wondering if her decision to come here had been a terrible mistake. But somewhere beneath her growing unease, another emotion stirred on. she recognized as the particular anticipation that came before a long-overdue reckoning. The briefing concluded with instructions for the tour route and stern warnings about safety protocols. As the group prepared to move to the first demonstration range, Victoria noticed several Marines casting curious glances in her direction. She maintained her modest demeanor, but internally she was already calculating distances, wind patterns, and the thousand small variables that would determine what happened next. The outdoor demonstration range stretched across several acres of carefully maintained desert terrain, with targets positioned at various distances and configurations. Colonel Steele stood at the central firing position, his custom rifle gleaming in the afternoon sun like a work of art. The weapon represented the cutting edge of military technology, its every component precision-engineered for maximum accuracy at extreme ranges. This rifle, the colonel announced to his audience, represents an investment of over $50,000 in research, development, and custom manufacturing. He handled the weapon with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. In the hands of a properly trained marksman, it's capable of engaging targets at distances that would have been considered impossible just a generation ago. Victoria watched from her position among the civilian observers, noting the way the Marines unconsciously arranged themselves in a hierarchy based on rank and reputation. The colonel commanded the center of attention, while lesser marksmen positioned themselves in carefully calculated proximity that proclaimed their status without explicitly challenging his authority. "Who among our civilian guests has experience with firearms?" Colonel Steele asked, his tone suggesting the question was more entertainment than genuine inquiry. Several hands rose tentatively, mostly belonging to middle-aged men who likely hunted or engaged in recreational shooting. "Excellent." The colonel smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Perhaps one of you would like to demonstrate civilian marksmanship before we show you what real precision looks like." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and Victoria could see several of the civilian men shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. Victoria's hand rose slowly, causing a ripple of surprise through both the civilian and military sections of the audience. "I'd be interested in trying," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. Colonel Steele's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "Ma'am, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is precision shooting at 500 meters. Perhaps we could start you on something more manageable." His tone managed to be both patronizing and dismissive simultaneously. 500 meters would be fine," Victoria replied, stepping forward from the group. "If you have a rifle I could borrow?" She kept her voice level, but something in her posture had changed subtly, a shift so minor that only someone with extensive training would have noticed it. The Marines exchanged glances, some amused, others slightly uncomfortable with the developing situation. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez moved closer to Colonel Steele, clearly intending to intervene, but he waved her off with the confidence of someone about to deliver an object lesson. "By all means." Colonel Steele gestured toward a rack of standard military rifles. "Please, select whatever feels comfortable." His smile widened as Victoria approached the weapons, clearly anticipating the entertainment value of watching a civilian struggle with military-grade equipment. Victoria examined the available rifles with what appeared to be casual interest, but was actually a professional assessment of each weapon's condition, balance, and suitability for the task ahead. She selected a well-maintained M40A5, checking its action with movements that were economical and precise without being obviously expert. "Interesting choice," Colonel Steele observed, his tone suggesting surprise. "That's actually one of our more challenging weapons for inexperienced shooters. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer something with less recoil?" "This will do fine," Victoria replied, shouldering the rifle to check its fit. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, muscle memory flooding back, despite the years she'd spent trying to forget. She could feel the attention of the entire group focused on her, but her world was already narrowing to the target, 500 meters downrange. Colonel Steele gestured toward the firing position with exaggerated courtesy. The target is a standard silhouette at 500 meters. Take as much time as you need to prepare. His tone made it clear he expected her to require considerable preparation for what would ultimately be an embarrassing failure. Victoria stepped up to the firing line, her movements becoming more fluid and purposeful with each step. She settled into a prone position with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless hours in similar circumstances. Though she was careful to make the motions appear awkward and uncertain to casual observation. The desert wind whispered across the range, carrying the scent of sage and sand. Victoria's breathing deepened and slowed as she settled behind the scope, her body automatically adjusting to compensate for minor variations in the ground and equipment. Through the magnified lens, the distant target sharpened into crystal clarity, and she found herself calculating windage, elevation, and a dozen other variables with the unconscious competence of someone for whom such calculations had once been a matter of life and death. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am," Colonel Steele called out, his voice carrying just a hint of impatience. "Take your time, but be aware that wind conditions can change quickly out here." Victoria's finger found the trigger, applying the kind of steady pressure that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training and dozens of missions that officially never happened. The rifle's report echoed across the range, and through her scope, she watched the bullet's impact with the satisfaction of someone whose skills had never truly dulled, despite years of deliberate neglect. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause as the implications of what they'd just witnessed sank in among the assembled Marines and civilians. Victoria lowered the rifle and looked up to find dozens of faces staring at her, with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something approaching awe. Colonel Steele stood frozen for a moment, his usual composure cracking as he processed what had just occurred. When he finally moved, it was to reach for a pair of high-powered binoculars, his movements sharp with barely controlled tension. "Spotting scope," he barked to one of his subordinates, his voice tight with something that might have been anger or apprehension. The Marine quickly set up the equipment, and Colonel Steele bent to examine the target through the powerful lens. What he saw there changed everything. The bullet had not merely hit the target, it had found the exact center of the silhouette's head, a shot that would have been impressive from a trained Marine sniper and was effectively impossible from an untrained civilian. The precision was so absolute that it transcended lucky accident and entered the realm of professional expertise. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from among the Marines, the words carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez moved to confirm the sighting, her own expression shifting from polite interest to professional recognition of something extraordinary. Victoria remained in position, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether her carefully constructed anonymity would survive the day. She could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force, and she forced herself to project confusion and surprise rather than the cold satisfaction she actually felt. Colonel Steele straightened slowly, his face a mask of controlled emotions. When he spoke, his voice carried a new undertone, respect mixed with suspicion and something that might have been genuine concern. "That's quite a shot, Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, each word measured and precise, remarkably precise for someone with limited experience. The pause before his final words was loaded with implication, and Victoria knew that her secret was beginning to unravel. The crowd of observers pressed closer, everyone wanting to see the evidence of the impossible shot. Excited conversations broke out among the Marines, their voices carrying the kind of professional appreciation reserved for truly exceptional marksmanship. Victoria found herself the center of attention in a way she'd hoped to avoid, but she maintained her facade of surprised modesty. "I guess I got lucky," she said with a slight shrug, handing the rifle back to the Marine who'd retrieved it from the rack. Beginner's luck, right? But even as she spoke the words, she could see in Colonel Steele's eyes that he wasn't buying her performance. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez approached with the measured steps of someone trying to process an anomaly. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen a civilian make that shot. Have you had any formal training we should know about?" Her question was polite but probing, the tone of someone who recognized professional competence when she saw it. Victoria shook her head, maintaining her cover story. "My father taught me to hunt when I was young, but nothing formal. I haven't even touched a rifle in years." The lie came easily, but she could see it was having less effect than she'd hoped. Colonel Steele continued to study her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Your stance? The way you handled the weapon, it was quite natural for someone with limited experience." His words were neutral, but the subtext was clear. He knew she was hiding something. The demonstration continued with the promised exhibition of military precision, but Victoria could feel the dynamic had shifted fundamentally. Where before she had been a curious anomaly, now she represented something potentially threatening to the established order. Several Marines made excuses to pass near her position, each taking a moment to assess her more carefully. When Colonel Steele took his turn at the firing line, his performance was flawless, multiple targets at varying distances. Each engagement demonstrating the skills that had built his reputation, but Victoria noticed that his attention kept drifting back to her, as if her presence had introduced an element of uncertainty into his carefully controlled world. As the official demonstration concluded and the group prepared to return to the main facility, Colonel Steele approached Victoria directly. "Mrs. Hayes, I wonder if you might have a few minutes to speak privately. I'm curious about your background in marksmanship." His request was politely phrased, but the underlying command was unmistakable. Victoria felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, the particular pressure that came when operational security began to collapse, but she also recognized an opportunity, the chance to finally confront the man whose decisions had cost her everything that mattered. She nodded agreement, knowing that whatever happened next would determine whether she could continue living the quiet life she'd built or whether the past would finally catch up with her. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez escorted the remaining civilians back to the main building, leaving Victoria alone with Colonel Steele and two of his senior staff members. The desert evening was beginning to settle around them, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Let's dispense with pretense, shall we?" Colonel Steele's voice had lost its public politeness, revealing the harder edge that lay beneath his command persona. That shot was made by someone with extensive training and considerable experience. "I'd like to know who you really are." Victoria met his gaze steadily, recognizing that the moment of truth had arrived. "My name is Victoria Hayes, and I'm exactly who I said I was." She paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, "I'm also former Staff Sergeant Victoria Chen, and I think you remember me quite well." Marcus, the use of his first name hit like a physical blow. Colonel Steele's composed facade cracked, revealing beneath it a mixture of shock, recognition, and something that might have been fear. The two staff members flanking him shifted positions slightly, their hands moving unconsciously toward their sidearms as they sensed the sudden change in atmosphere. "Chen," Colonel Steele repeated slowly, as if testing the name against his memory. "Operation Blackwater, Afghanistan, 2018." His voice carried a weight of recognition and barely suppressed emotion. "You're supposed to be dead." Victoria smiled, the expression containing no warmth whatsoever. "Funny how that worked out, isn't it? Almost like someone decided my survival wasn't convenient for their version of events." She took a step closer, noting how both staff members tensed at her movement. "I've been waiting 5 years for this conversation. Marcus, 5 years to ask you why my team was left to die so you could cover up your mistake." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, heavy with the weight of secrets and buried guilt. Colonel Steele's face had gone pale beneath his desert tan, and Victoria could see his mind racing as he calculated the implications of her survival and presence. "I don't know what you think you know about Afghanistan," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "but operational details are classified, and accusations based on incomplete information can be dangerous." The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria's laugh was cold and humorless. "Dangerous? You want to talk about dangerous? Let me tell you about dangerous. Marcus, dangerous is watching your entire team die, because someone was more concerned with protecting their career than protecting the people under their command." Her voice remained steady, but the anger beneath it was volcanic in its intensity. The confrontation might have escalated further, but the approach of vehicle headlights interrupted the standoff. A black SUV pulled up near their position, and Staff Sergeant Gonzalez emerged from the passenger seat, her expression tense with official concern. "Sir," she called out as she approached, "we've received word that Mrs. Hayes's background check has raised some flags. Command wants to speak with you immediately." Her gaze flickered between Victoria and the colonel, clearly sensing the tension between them. Colonel Steele's jaw tightened as he processed this new complication. "What kind of flags?" he asked, though Victoria suspected he already knew the answer. "Military records that don't quite match her stated background. See, and some inquiries about why certain classified files have been accessed." Staff Sergeant Gonzalez's professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her confusion about the developing situation. Victoria felt a cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Having trouble keeping your story straight, Marcus? I imagine there are quite a few people who'd be interested to know the real details about what happened in Afghanistan." She turned to Staff Sergeant Gonzalez. "Did you know your commanding officer left an entire Marine reconnaissance team to die, rather than risk his own precious reputation?" The accusation hung in the desert air like smoke from a gunshot. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she realized she was witnessing something far beyond a simple security irregularity. The two staff members flanking Colonel Steele looked between their commander and Victoria with growing uncertainty about whose orders they should be following. Colonel Steele's mask of authority was cracking visibly under the pressure of exposure. "Sergeant Gonzalez, I want Mrs. Hayes detained for questioning. National security implications." His voice carried the desperate edge of someone watching carefully constructed lies begin to unravel. But Victoria was already moving, her body flowing into the kind of tactical awareness that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. "I don't think so. Marcus, see, I've spent 5 years preparing for this moment, 5 years gathering evidence, building connections, and making sure that if anything happened to me, certain information would find its way to very interested parties." She reached slowly into her jacket, her movements deliberate and non-threatening, despite the explosive tension of the moment. From an inner pocket, she withdrew a small device that glinted in the fading desert light. "GPS tracker," she explained conversationally. "My location has been monitored since I arrived here today. If I don't check in within the next hour, a very detailed dossier about Operation Blackwater gets delivered to the Pentagon, the House Armed Services Committee, and several investigative journalists who specialize in military misconduct." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Amazing what kind of insurance policy you can build when you're officially dead." Colonel Steele's face had gone from pale to ashen as the implications sank in. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained hard as winter steel. "Justice, Marcus. For the Marines who died because of your cowardice, for the families who never learned the truth about what happened to their sons and daughters, and for the 5 years I've spent living in the shadows because the truth was too inconvenient for your career." The desert evening closed around them as Victoria outlined exactly what she expected from the man who had betrayed everything she'd once believed in. In the distance, the lights of the base twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the darkness, the ghosts of the dead waited for the justice that had been too long delayed. The confrontation would continue through the night, but Victoria knew she had already won the most important victory. After 5 years of careful planning and patient waiting, the truth was finally coming to light, and Marcus Steele, for all his rank and authority, could no longer hide behind his carefully constructed lies. The simple woman who had walked onto the base that morning was gone, replaced by someone who had finally stopped running from her past. In its place stood a warrior who had found her purpose again, and who would not rest until justice was served for all those who had been betrayed by the very institution they had sworn to serve. The silence that followed Victoria's ultimatum stretched like a taut wire across the desert evening. Colonel Steele's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions: denial, anger, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate resignation that Victoria recognized from her own darkest moments after Afghanistan. The two staff members flanking him looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly realizing they were witnessing something far beyond their security clearance level. "You don't understand the complexities of what happened," Colonel Steele said finally, his voice carrying the hollow ring of someone trying to convince himself as much as his audience. "Command decisions in combat zones require sacrifices that civilians could never comprehend. Sometimes good people die so that missions can be completed and greater catastrophes can be prevented." Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Spare me the lecture on military necessity. Marcus, I was there. I saw you panic when the intelligence turned out to be wrong. I watched you choose your own survival over your duty to your Marines." She took another step closer, her movement fluid and controlled despite the explosive tension. "Tell me, how did you sleep at night knowing that 6 Marines died because you were too much of a coward to admit you'd led them into a trap?" Staff Sergeant Gonzalez shifted uncomfortably, her training warring with her growing understanding that she was witnessing the unraveling of everything she'd been taught to respect about military hierarchy. "Sir," she said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more secure environment?" "No," Victoria said firmly, her gaze never leaving Colonel Steele's face. "This conversation has been delayed for 5 years. It ends here, tonight, under the same kind of desert sky where my Marines died." She reached into another pocket, withdrawing a small recording device. "Marcus, I want you to tell the truth. All of it. Starting with why you ignored the intelligence reports that indicated the compound was a trap." Colonel Steele's composure finally cracked completely. "You think this is simple? You think command decisions are made in a vacuum?" His voice rose, tinged with hysteria. "I had orders from above, political considerations that went far beyond one reconnaissance mission. The operation had to proceed, regardless of intelligence concerns, because too many important people had invested too much in its success." The admission hung in the air like smoke, and Victoria felt a cold satisfaction at finally hearing the truth spoken aloud. "So you knew it was a trap? You knew my team was being sent to die, and you did it anyway to protect your career and please your superiors." Her voice was deadly quiet now, more dangerous than any shout. "It wasn't supposed to go that way," Steele said desperately. "The extraction team was supposed to be in position. Air support was promised. You were supposed to have backup." He was sweating now, despite the cooling evening air, his carefully maintained image dissolving like ice in the desert heat. Victoria's eyes blazed with fury, but none of that happened. Did it? Because when the shooting started and your operation turned into a disaster, you decided it was easier to write off 6 Marines than to admit you'd made a catastrophic mistake. She gestured toward the recording device. "Keep talking. Marcus, tell us about how you falsified the after-action reports." The colonel's resistance crumbled like an ancient wall, finally giving way to pressure. "The reports? They had to be adjusted. Too many careers were at stake. Too many political ramifications if the truth came out. His voice was barely above a whisper now. Your team was listed as killed in action during a successful intelligence-gathering operation. Heroes who died serving their country. Heroes who died because their commanding officer was a coward. Victoria corrected icily. Heroes whose families never learned that their sons and daughters were sacrificed for political convenience. She turned to Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, whose face had gone pale with the implications of what she was hearing. Sergeant, I want you to understand something. This man has built his entire career on the graves of better Marines than he'll ever be. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez found her voice with visible effort. Sir, these are extremely serious allegations. If there's any truth to them, she trailed off, clearly struggling with the implications for her own faith in the system she served. Colonel Steele seemed to age years in the span of moments, the weight of his secrets finally crushing the facade he'd maintained for so long. What do you want from me? He asked Victoria, his voice hollow with defeat. You've got your confession? You've destroyed everything I've worked for. What more could you possibly need? Victoria's expression hardened further. I want the truth made public. I want the families of my Marines to know how their children really died. I want you to face the consequences of your cowardice instead of living comfortably on the reputation built from their sacrifice. She paused, letting the words sink in. And I want you to understand that there are some things more important than career advancement and political expediency. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted the confrontation. Multiple sets of headlights cut through the gathering darkness, and Victoria counted at least 4 military police vehicles converging on their position. Colonel Steele's expression shifted to one of desperate hope, clearly believing that rescue was at hand. Did you call for backup, Marcus? Victoria asked conversationally, seemingly unconcerned by the approaching forces, because I should mention that my insurance policy isn't just about location tracking. I've had people monitoring military communications all day, and they've been quite interested in the unusual activity around this base. As the vehicles screeched to a halt, armed Marines emerged with weapons drawn, but uncertain expressions. The lead figure who approached was a woman in colonel's insignia that Victoria didn't recognize, her bearing suggesting someone accustomed to dealing with complex and sensitive situations. Colonel Davidson, Internal Affairs Division, the newcomer announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. I'm here to investigate allegations of misconduct related to Operation Blackwater and the falsification of military records. Her gaze swept the assembled group before settling on Colonel Steele. Marcus, you're under arrest pending a full investigation. Victoria felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with surprise. Her contingency plans had included contact with Internal Affairs, but she hadn't expected such a rapid response. Colonel Davidson, she said, stepping forward. I'm Victoria Chen, formerly Staff Sergeant Chen. I believe you've been expecting to hear from me. Colonel Davidson nodded grimly. We have indeed. Sergeant Chen, your detailed reports reached us this afternoon, along with considerable corroborating evidence that's been enlightening. She gestured to the military police. Secure Colonel Steele. Full rights. Full documentation. This is going to be very thoroughly investigated. As the MPs moved to arrest him, Colonel Steele turned back to Victoria with an expression of pure hatred. You have no idea what you've unleashed. He snarled. There are people far more powerful than me who were involved in Afghanistan. People who won't hesitate to eliminate threats to their interests. Victoria's smile was cold and predatory. Let them try. Marcus, I've spent 5 years planning for this moment, and I'm not the same naive Marine you betrayed in Afghanistan. I've learned some very interesting skills during my time among the dead. She gestured toward Colonel Davidson. Besides, I'm no longer operating alone. As the military police led Colonel Steele away, Colonel Davidson approached Victoria with expression of professional respect mixed with curiosity. Sergeant Chen, We're going to need extensive debriefings about Afghanistan and your survival. But first, I have to ask that shot you made today. Our range officers are calling it impossible. Victoria shrugged, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders now that justice was beginning to unfold. Muscle memory. Colonel, some skills you never really lose, no matter how hard you try to forget them. She looked back toward the shooting range where everything had started just hours earlier, though I have to admit, it felt good to stop pretending to be helpless. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, who had been silent through the arrests, finally found her voice. Ma'am, what you did today, it took incredible courage to come forward. But why now? Why wait 5 years? Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. Because 5 years ago, I was broken. I was angry and hurt, and I wanted revenge more than justice. It took me this long to understand the difference. She gestured toward the departing vehicles carrying Colonel Steele. Revenge would have meant putting a bullet in him from 1,000 yards out. Justice means making sure the truth comes out, and that the families of my Marines finally know what really happened to their children. Colonel Davidson nodded approvingly. We're going to need you to testify before a military tribunal, and possibly before Congress. If this goes as high as we suspect it might, are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I've been preparing for it for 5 years. Victoria replied. I have documents, recordings, witness statements from other survivors who were ordered to keep quiet. Everything needed to make sure the truth comes out completely. She paused, then added with grim satisfaction, Marcus was right about one thing, this goes much higher than him. But that just means more people are going to face justice. As the immediate crisis subsided, and the various officials began the process of securing evidence and coordinating investigations, Victoria found herself standing alone on the desert range where it had all begun. The stars were emerging in the clear sky above, the same stars that had witnessed the tragedy in Afghanistan and now bore witness to the beginning of justice. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez approached quietly, her expression thoughtful. Sergeant Chen, can I ask you something personal? When Victoria nodded, she continued, how did you survive? Not just the mission, but the years afterward. How did you keep going when everything you believed in had been betrayed? Victoria considered the question carefully. I almost didn't, she admitted. There were times when I thought about joining my Marines, if you know what I mean. But then I realized that dying would mean their sacrifice was truly meaningless. The only way to honor their memory was to make sure their story was told and their families knew the truth about what kind of people they'd raised. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another official vehicle, this one bearing federal plates. 2 individuals in dark suits emerged, their bearing suggesting federal law enforcement rather than military personnel. Sergeant Chen, the lead agent, called out as they approached. Agent Morrison, FBI. We've been following the Afghanistan situation as part of a broader investigation into military contracting fraud and political corruption. Your testimony is going to be crucial to several ongoing cases. Victoria felt a moment of wariness. Federal involvement could complicate things significantly. What kind of broader investigation? She asked carefully. Agent Morrison's smile was professionally reassuring, the kind that's been building cases against the people who ordered Colonel Steele to send your team into that trap, the kind that's finally ready to hold everyone accountable, from field commanders all the way up to Pentagon officials and their civilian counterparts. As the full scope of what her single shot had set in motion began to become clear, Victoria felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She had wanted justice for her Marines, but she was beginning to understand that she had stumbled into something much larger than personal vindication. Colonel Davidson rejoined the group, her expression grim but determined. Sergeant Chen, I want you to know that what you've done today is going to have far-reaching consequences. There are going to be people who try to discredit you, intimidate you, or worse. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Victoria's hand unconsciously moved to the dog tags hidden beneath her shirt. feeling the metal that connected her to the Marines who had died in Afghanistan. "Colonel, I've been fighting this battle for 5 years. The only difference is that now I'm not fighting it alone." She looked around at the assembled officials, then back toward the base where her journey had begun. "Those Marines trusted me to have their backs. I failed them once. I won't fail them again." Agent Morrison stepped forward with a business card and a serious expression. "We're going to need to debrief you extensively about everything you know. There are safe houses available if you feel threatened, and witness protection if it becomes necessary." "That won't be necessary," Victoria said firmly. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. Whatever comes next, I'm going to face it head on." She pocketed the business card anyway, recognizing the practical value of federal protection even if she hoped not to need it. As the various officials continued their coordination and evidence gathering, Victoria found herself thinking about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the broken survivor who had crawled out of the Afghan desert to the woman who had finally found the courage to demand justice, it had been a transformation paid for in years of pain and careful planning. The simple woman who had walked onto the base that morning was truly gone now, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with bullets and bombs, but with truth and courage and the determination to honor the memory of those who had fallen. In the distance, the lights of the base continued to twinkle against the desert darkness, and Victoria knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges as the full weight of her revelations began to reverberate through the military and political establishments. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt truly at peace with herself and her choices. The Marines who had died in Afghanistan would finally receive the justice they deserved, and their families would finally know the truth about their sacrifice. That knowledge was worth whatever personal cost might come next.